Thanks for joining us for another Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm one of your two hosts, Noor Kyle.
And I'm the other one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
Yes, and thank you so much for joining us. We're back after our holiday break. Thanks for hanging in there. Hopefully you saw our New Year's greeting a few days ago. We extend to you again, Happy New Year. And we are happy to celebrate these first couple weeks with you as we keep the ball rolling and keep working hard at making good, interesting, juicy content. But again, what it's really about is the learning together. So if you're watching here, whether you're live or on the replay, thank you for being here. We really appreciate having you. Do we need to do any announcements, Mushtaq?
Let me see.
Yeah, we have the two things.
Yeah, we have the two things. Tell them about the two things.
So again, if you haven't seen our New Year's video, we have recently reopened up our Sufi group where we do a sohbet once a month, and you'll find more information about that below. That is something that if you sign up for, you are, you're committing to showing up. And if you can't show up live, then it's a good idea to keep up with the replays. But we really believe in creating a sense of cohesive community there. So yeah.
And it's a lot scarier than this.
Yes.
It is. We talk about things that terrify people. So
it's a bit more of an immersive experience in the sense that it is more intimate. We have we lean more into our usage of Arabic terms, for instance, things like that. So yeah, we make you work.
Nobody's going to try and convert anybody to anything, but we talk about things plainly there.
Exactly. Yes. So that is an active Sufi learning community. And also, we also have our retreat coming up in May, and we have all the information up and out there now so that you can peruse it and see if that might be something you might be interested in.
Yeah, are you crazy enough to spend a week with us in the Swedish wilderness?
Or at least 5 days. Yeah, 5 days, 4 nights, in person in Sweden. Kind of rural, but beautiful.
Middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a lot of different fun activities. Well, not activities per se in the sense of entertainments, but
there will not be volleyball.
No, there is a hot tub though, so there's that, and there is a lake, and there are probably walking trails. I would imagine.
It's Sweden. There are walking trails.
Yeah, we think it's going to be a pretty awesome experience, not just for anyone who comes with us, but for us as well. I'm excited. I've never been to Europe before, so this is a big deal for me personally. So, all of that information you will find via links in the description. Hope you'll check those out, because we would love to have more people along for the ride. All right, so I don't think I have anything to add. Yeah, Levita says I'm thinking about the Midsummer movie. I will never forget that movie. Let's put it that way. All right.
Yeah, and if we see any maypoles going up, we're leaving.
All right. So today we are going to be touching on something I'm not sure that we touched on directly before here. We're going to be talking
peripherally
about, yeah. Have we honed in on it? Not quite yet, which is why we think it'll be a really fun topic to talk about.
And we're kind of planning on spending the whole month looking at this subject from various different places. Yeah.
So this is alchemy.
Yes.
And yeah. We're going to talk about alchemy, and we are going to be talking about that over from our own particular point of view.
Yeah. And we're going to generalize this week.
Yeah. We're covering a pretty broad span of history on this one, aren't we?
Yeah. So let's start out with the simple question of what the heck is alchemy, Noor?
What the heck is alchemy? It is, I guess we could kind of think of it as a science, right? In a manner of speaking.
It is a science.
Science of transformation. So we can
Yes.
start there. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
It is exactly that. And it is a specific kind of transformation. Transformation that involves purification. And before you transform, it destroys. And the old alchemical saying is solve et coagula, to dissolve and then put back together.
yeah, it's kind of a decluttering, isn't it?
Yeah.
You start there.
Alchemy has the idea that all matter, and by connection, all spirit has impurities. And its method of dealing with that is you take everything apart, you remove the impurities, and then you put everything back together in a pure and exalted form. And there's several steps to this, and there's lots of books on it that are completely impossible to read and understand.
Deliberately so in many
Yeah.
cases. Yeah.
And it has a long history. Part of the history of alchemy is that it is a convergent evolution from what we can tell. China developed alchemy, and it didn't get it from Europe. It had alchemy before Europe had alchemy. And this was a Taoist practice, and its focus was on immortality. Chinese alchemists wanted to find ways to live forever, so they drank a lot of mercury. Some ideas are better than others. It developed independently from what we can tell in India. India's alchemy focused a lot on creating medicinal preparations, especially the alchemy of herbs. And this is where we find a lot of really interesting Ayurvedic preparations. They made really potent medicines back in the day. The Arabs basically grabbed alchemy, as far as we can tell, from contact with India, Central Asia, and probably China, and kind of combined all of these ideas. Uh, the first Arab alchemists were probably in North Africa, from the area of Egypt to Morocco. And some of that stuff is still going on today. You may not have known this, but some of the best perfumers in the world are from Morocco. And their method of creating essences for making their perfumes is downright alchemical in nature and has not changed for maybe 1,000 years. But I tell you, my nose has never been happier than when I was in Marrakesh. I mean, it smells really good in the places where you have the perfumers' rows.
So
So,
this is a science that goes back
yes,
at least a couple thousand years.
probably. And there will be people that tells you that it goes back even way further than that, into ancient Egypt and that sort of thing, and into Greece. And some of that is true, or at least probably true. So from the Maghreb is all of North Africa, basically. Alchemy moved up into Spain. And that's where it made contact with Europe. And of course, in Europe, you had a particular kind of alchemy that was really interested in the process of turning what they called base metals into gold. And they also liked the idea of developing the philosopher's stone for living forever. and that sort of thing. But the whole lead into gold thing was a big deal. And you can, in fact, turn lead into gold, but it will cost you millions of dollars and you don't get very much. And what you get is highly radioactive. And if you keep it on you, you'll die. Just as a little bit of a warning.
So hold that thought. I just want to share, since some people are new here, we typically have people mute until they have something they'd like to share or ask a question, just because it cuts down on background noise. So if I mute you, it is not me telling you sit down and shut up and never talk again. It's just trying to navigate managing all the background noise and stuff. Yeah. So, you can always either raise your hand using the reactions option. Make sure that's available. It's usually on the bottom of your screen, or if you're on your phone.
Yeah, where it says reactions, you can raise your hand.
But otherwise, you can unmute yourself, and I'll try to catch it. But
yeah,
I'm just gonna.
And you're always ready to comment. You're always welcome. This is not like we are going to front load you information and you have to sit there and take it. Right. You are more than welcome to ask questions at any point. And there are very few dumb questions. I won't say there are no dumb questions, but there are very few dumb questions.
Yeah. All right. So you were speaking of danger, Mushtaq.
Danger.
Since a lot of these materials are not things you would want to have just like chilling in a bowl on the kitchen counter.
The number of European and Chinese alchemists who died from heavy metal poisoning is scary. And in China, mercury and cinnabar, which is an ore-bearing mercury, were all like considered magical and alchemical and used for all of this stuff used for medicine. The first king of united China, Emperor, what's his name? I don't remember. Where is Palin when we need her? He wanted to live forever. And so he hired alchemists who gave him mercury pills. And then people wondered why he went slowly insane. Mm-hmm. And the same sort of thing happened in Europe. Ingesting mercury in various forms is not usually a good idea. Plus, breathing the fumes from various metals that you're working with, not so good. When I was studying alchemy, I stayed away from metallic alchemy for that reason. I looked at it and said, these guys aren't even using exhaust hoods for this stuff. I ain't going to do it. I've seen what lead poisoning looks like. I've seen what mercury poisoning looks like. I don't want it. No need. So I concentrated on plant alchemy, which is considerably safer and much more interesting to me. So, aside from physical alchemy, there is this other sort of alchemy that pretty much went hand in hand with it, at least in times and places, and that is the alchemy of spiritual transformation. And this is where we get into Mr. Gurdjieff's stuff, because I consider that he used a pattern of work that really resembled the alchemical process. Now, when I say the alchemical process, I mean it followed specific steps and rules. Today, everybody uses the term alchemy, right? I've seen alchemical hypnosis, alchemical massage, alchemical bagel factory, whatever. Everybody uses the term. Very few people can even define what alchemy is. And even fewer actually follow the steps of it.
We have a sort of relevant question from Jacob, if you don't mind me reading
Okay.
that.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so Jacob says, I find that the exoteric motivations for occult or quote magical unquote practices can in some ways be tied to the economic slash political climate of the culture they're born into. Do you think it's possible that a desire for the transmutation of lead into gold had more of a quote trade value unquote application for a lot of the early Chinese formulae?
Maybe. Um, I have to admit that I know more about European alchemy than I do about Chinese alchemy. And
I
I
mean,
know in
this.
Europe, the whole lead into gold thing was how alchemists found employment. You know, if you wanted to do real alchemical experiment, you needed a patron.
I was
And what you
gonna
had to do
suggest that, yeah.
was, yeah, was get somebody who would pay you to do alchemical experiments, including turning lead into gold, and hope that you could do what you needed to do and get out of there before they decided to burn you at the stake.
However, I'm going to hold on to this question and see if
Yeah,
we can do a
it's a
little
good question.
investigating. Yeah. So,
It's just that
Jacob,
unlike every other
good one.
spiritual teacher out there, we don't have all the answers.
But this is, I mean, yeah, I would think that the directions that people go in tend to be inspired by their circumstances, no
Yeah.
doubt. And
And you will find that when it comes to magic and alchemy, there are a few prime motivators: money, sex, power. The amount of here's how you get a girl in the grimoires of the Middle Ages is ridiculous. Here's how you find treasure. You're going to raise up demons to show you where there is hidden treasure, which strikes me as very, very weird. Uh, Nancy says European alchemy did a lot with precious stones. So did Indian alchemy. Indian alchemy, that's where I experienced a lot of the working with precious stones to help create elixirs from the stones, which was fascinating.
mm. Chris, did I see you unmuted at some point, or am I mistaken?
Might be mistaken, but I know that Chinese use the stones as well. That was a big one. And then Mushtaq, you're getting into the spiritual aspect of it, and I'm like literally at the edge of my seat.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we will hold on to the stuff we talked about earlier, but let's get into the meat of tonight's topic.
Yes, so the spiritual aspect. This is something that has been around for a long time. And the idea is just as you can transform plants into potent medicines and transform base metals into gold, metaphorically at least, you can use these processes to transform yourself. And both Sufism and Mr. Gurdjieff use a similar pattern for this. From us, the founder of our particular line of transmission studied with an alchemist for several years before he found his final teacher. As a matter of fact, it was only after his teacher, whose name was Arslan Baba, which means daddy lion in Turkish, died, what did he go and find his final teacher at his first teacher's direction? He said, go over and find this guy and study with him. I gotta die now.
Yeah, this guy was kind of, he was what we might call a shaman, quote unquote. That's not
Yeah,
the best
shaman,
word, but
alchemist.
yeah. So he was very much steeped in these quote unquote esoteric practices and such.
Yeah. And basically this is how it works. You very carefully deconstruct yourself, deconstruct your ego, deconstruct your mechanical self, and then you purify it. Then what's left is recombined into something that is strong and pure and permanent. Permanent being one of the major things here. And most importantly, this process of deconstruction and reconstruction allows you to move from your fate to your destiny. So the unnatural human being, the one that you start with, has a fate. It's mechanically programmed. And you can learn to see this in people. And it can be a little bit disconcerting because you see this person and you know 20 years from now, they're going to be here. Because it is a mechanical step-by-step situation. You know, and I've said to people, you realize 20 years from now, you're most likely going to be in a psychiatric ward. Or 20 years from now, you're going to be a junkie. And sadly, I was right, because fate is mechanical. And that which is mechanical is predictable. Destiny is not mechanical. Destiny requires free will. So the salve of alchemy is to dissolve those elements, which are, for all intents and purposes, impurities, and remove them from the organism, then to recombine the elements into the spiritual equivalent of the philosopher's stone. Does that make sense?
Any questions so far?
Yeah, and we are
Definitely
going to
okay
get
to
into
have
the
them.
how of this.
Yeah. All right, Jacob says, I'm seeing a lot of parallels between this and the idea of the quote, larval human
Oh, hell yes.
outlined,
Absolutely.
yeah, in your human adulthood series. Not necessarily a question, but an observation, which is also good.
Yeah.
We appreciate those. And yeah, I think that we very much have that same sense ourselves, that there's certainly an echoing of that here. So great point, and thank you for noticing that, Jacob. Means a lot. Hind.
Yes, when you say that when someone has faith, you can predict what's gonna be what he's going to be like in 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, you can predict their outcome.
Is faith our beliefs, our limited beliefs?
Only in part. Fate is your programming. And I make a distinction here, and not everybody makes this distinction, but I do, between your fate, which is your ego's programming, or the programming of your nafs acting itself out. This is, if all you got going for you is your nafs al-amara, everything is going to follow its commands, and its commands are purely mechanical. Destiny is when you actually develop enough free will to make choices that are not preordained for you by your mechanical nature. That's my distinction.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and so before, so it's like you have the nafs al-amara, then you have the nafs al-lawwama.
Yeah, and you will move up, and those turn out to be very, very close to the alchemical process.
Okay.
Which, just like with the nafs, are seven steps to the alchemical process.
Yeah, we should have we done any talks about that?
Nope.
No.
We've done talks about the nafs, but we haven't done talks
Yeah.
about this. This is getting into heavy stuff. This is almost stuff that we don't talk about publicly, but I figure, what the hell? Anybody who can't deal with it can go away. And there will be plenty of people who can't deal with it because this will disagree with people's preconceptions. The last time I talked anything about alchemy, I got people coming in trying to lecture me on Paracelsus who don't even speak Latin or have any sense of where he got most of his material. I had people who would try and it was funny. It was sad.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't familiar with the term nafs al-amara, that's like the part of any person that is strictly ego driven in the most mechanical, basically the most toxic way. You just follow your whims. It doesn't matter who you hurt, including yourself. None of that matters. And, you know, if you're not working to stay conscious of that, then often we're living in that state.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. That living in that state of not really being conscious of consequences of our actions.
Yeah. And everybody starts there.
Yes.
Everybody starts there, unless you're some sort of born a saint, you know, springing full born from the heart of a lotus flower or something.
Yeah. So
everybody starts there.
It has to be said that it's normal and it's healthy in the sense that we all start there and move on.
Yeah.
Ideally.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to do bad things, because the commanding self can command you to mechanically do good things.
Yeah.
As well as bad. The key word here, though, is mechanical.
Right. Yep.
And we're supposed to develop a mechanical self. We need one. We must have a nafs if we want to exist in this plane of existence.
Yep.
But it doesn't have to rule us.
And that's the key. That is the line between fate and destiny. So. What we are talking about this evening is this process of shaking loose from that mechanical trajectory that leads us, you know, that doesn't leave us the option of having a destiny. And transformation is required to have any hope, really, of living in the direction of one's destiny.
Yeah. And Mr. Gurdjieff used to say, you must either change everything or change nothing. And that is a purely alchemical statement when it comes down to it. You can't remove just a little bit of the impurities within a system or an element. You have to remove them all, because any impurities left will corrupt your process. And it's the same with humans. We work on removing our impurities bit by bit, little by little, starting with processes like self-observation and self-remembering. Breath. Breath is the starting point in our own alchemical purification, because breath creates the fire that we need for the first step. No breath, no fire. No fire, no transformation.
So here we're talking about the energy to create change.
Yes.
Yes.
Which we have talked about before in various forms and such.
Exactly. I'm trying to find ways to incorporate language we've used in the past.
Yeah. In order to understand any of this, folks, you must go back and watch all of our videos. Sorry.
Word. So, alchemical fire, starting there.
Alchemical fire. And as the old alchemical texts say, the alchemical fire is a slow fire. And that means that we don't just burn everything up all at once, though we do burn everything up. One of the processes in the alchemical transformation is called calcining. It's the first process in the 7-step process. Calcining means literally to burn.
Calcination, yep.
Yes. So if I were making an alchemical elixir of a plant, or even more interesting, the alchemical stone of a plant, I would separate the three elements, the mercury, the sulfur, and the salt, through a particular process called refluxing. Then once I have the three elements separated, I will set aside the mercury and the sulfur, and I will take the salt, which is called in alchemy the caput mortuum, the deadhead, and I will calcine it. I will subject it to a fire in a process of steps that turn whatever plant matter is there into pure white ash. It burns away everything but the pure immutable minerals that are part of that plant's essence. Then, through several processes, I will recombine the three elements that I have separated into one thing, which would then be, depending on how far I take the process, either an alchemical elixir, which can be a very, very potent medicine, or the alchemical stone of the plant, which is way more potent than even the alchemical elixir. You know, I've done this with, one of my favorite ones was Millennia officinalis, which is the common lemon balm plant. If you look these days on various mind hacking sites, you'll discover that lemon balm is considered a nootropic. It's a mind enhancing plant. Taking it makes you smarter and more relaxed. Now, this is true of the tea, and it is 1,000 times more true of the alchemical extraction of the plant. If you can produce the alchemical stone of Millennia, it has a profound effect on the system. It is, I don't know if y'all know what taking a nootropic is like. Examples would be modafinil, some of the paracetams, that basically they just make you smarter, more alert, and more focused.
I mean, in a sense, caffeine could be considered.
Caffeine is mildly
Yeah.
nootropic, yeah.
Yes. So Nancy's asking for a bit of clarification, asking, what does the alchemical stone of a plant mean?
Okay, at the end of all of the recombinations of the three primal elements, if you take it all the way to the last step, which is to create the stone, what you get is a solid substance that looks like amber, usually. If you put it on a piece of glass and heat the glass, it will melt. It won't smoke, and when you remove the heat, it will reharden without impurities.
So it's
And
kind
you
of like
take
a resin almost.
Yeah, it
right?
looks a
Yeah.
lot like a resin. It's very hard to produce that last step. You really have to be well practiced. And so it's literally like a stone. The elixir is much easier to produce. The elixir is more like your basic tincture, only more potent.
So I think we should continue with the example of the
Yeah.
plant. When we talk about, so the salt is kind of like the material.
The salt is the physical aspect of it. The sulfur is the energetic aspect of it. And the mercury is the spiritual aspect of it.
Yeah,
That's a
so
way to
this
think
is
about it.
symbolic language
Yeah.
utilized. This is kind of why this stuff can be difficult to understand, because we're using terms that mean different things in different contexts. Yeah.
And for those of you who have been hanging around here for a while, you're going to be going, oh, affirming, denying, and reconciling elements. Yeah.
Yes.
The law of three and the law of seven fit right into this, because the basic alchemical process is sevenfold. It follows the pattern of the octave. Big surprise.
Yeah.
And the elements that you work with are threefold.
We'll be getting more into that probably later in the month, huh?
Yeah.
So thank you for asking that, Nancy, because it's a good question. Yeah.
So one of the things that you need in any alchemical process is a solvent. And one of the things that the old alchemists looked for was the alkahest, which is the universal solvent, the solvent that will dissolve anything. The one thing I could never figure out is if you produce the alkahest, how the heck were you ever going to contain it? There is no container in the world that will hold it. It will dissolve right through it without changing itself, which is very, very interesting. In plant alchemy, the most common solvent is alcohol. Specifically, the quintessence of wine, the 5 times distilled essence of red wine was what was usually used. And some of you might be going, wait a minute. If this is Muslim alchemy, how come you're using wine? And the answer is, you're not supposed to drink it. It's used as a solvent. The Quran doesn't say don't use it as a solvent. It says, yeah, it's better off if you don't drink it. So it's something that you have to remember is that things like this are contextual. So as far as I know, all Arabic alchemists worked with alcohol as a solvent for a number of reasons. One of which is that it was the safest, and the other was that it was the most effective without being dangerous, or least dangerous. You can still blow yourself up, but. So.
Try to avoid that.
Try to avoid blowing yourself up. But it is actually a risk that you take when you're doing any kind of physical alchemy, because you are working with substances that are volatile. In spiritual alchemy, it's the same thing. You are working with things that are volatile, and you can blow yourself up if you're not careful. All you have to do is look at the refuse of the spiritual endeavors of the West to find people who blew themselves up. They're all over the place. It's kind of sad.
What are some practical examples of that?
Without naming names, some of them,
names.
some of them will end up in psychiatric hospitals. That was fairly common back in the day. You start working on yourself. You don't have somebody to guide you. You don't understand the steps. And the next thing you know, you have a psychotic break and you end up in a psych ward. I used to see that all the time. I spent a decade putting myself through college and graduate school working in psychiatric hospitals because I could work at night and they paid me really good. And I would frequently see somebody brought in and they would present as a psychotic break, but you talk to them a little bit and you realize that they had a spiritual malaise, not a chemical one. It's probably 1 in 100 people back in the day. They tended to be young, they tended to be really experimental, and they tended to be really stupid.
Like too reckless, too daring.
Way too reckless. Somebody says, here, eat the seeds from this plant. It'll open your third eye. And the next thing you know, they are tied to a bed in a psychiatric hospital trying to pick the bugs off their skin.
Mm-hmm. That aren't there.
That aren't really there. They're the only ones who can see them. So that's a serious consideration. So
Jonathan has a question. And then
and
after
Jacob
Jonathan,
has something to say too. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a vulnerable period during
I
the
would say
process
so.
of spiritual transformation, where you've begun the process of taking oneself apart and purification has begun, and that the vulnerability is there until is going to remain there until the recombining
Yes.
starts to happen. At what point can recombining start to happen? Does it have to wait until the end, or can it, like purification, be started in small ways throughout the
The
process?
combining happens if you think about what we have talked about over the last few weeks, and we have talked about like the levels of man, right? You have the man 1, 2, and 3 in Gurdjieff's model, and then man 4 that creates the magnetic center. The recombining starts at the magnetic center.
Yeah.
It doesn't finish until you're finished, but it starts there.
And that's a really good question. And it reminds me of something we discussed earlier, which is that, you know, you're going through this process of breakdown, and suddenly it's like you're a sponge. You're just open to everything. Everything is amazing. And wow, you're like consuming all these new ideas. But really, you kind of have to just flow with that and be continue to be open until you find something that actually is going to be the vehicle that gets you moving forward. And at that point, that's when you kind of begin to pull yourself back together again and rein yourself in.
Yeah.
So that you're not just like, you know, finding your attention scattered all over the place, being pulled in 70 different new and exciting directions.
Yeah, and Jacob makes an observation here. It says he had exactly the same experience in his early 20s, and he didn't end up in a hospital, but the psychosis was painful and difficult to emerge from.
Yep, and I have a friend of mine who happened to go through the same thing, and she was overseas when it happened, so it was a whole stressful ordeal.
And the thing is, if you have
back from that,
if you have a support system and a teacher who knows what's going on, it's not a big problem. I give you an example from my own experience. Years ago, long ago, in the middle end of the 20th century, I was hanging out with a particular Sufi order, and I had one good friend there who one day he flipped out. And it wasn't like, oh, you know, pull your hair out, bang your head on the wall. His mind disconnected. And so they moved him into the khanega, into the Sufi house. And the sheikh took care of him. They gave him a job that he could do. He would stop. They made him the tea maker. And he would literally start making tea and then just stop and be lost in the boiling water for 20 minutes. And when that happened, everybody knew that they'd just let him be there till he came back out of it and then drink the tea. They didn't put pressure on him to be normal. They understood that he was going through a profound spiritual change. And in about 6, maybe 8 weeks, he was done with it. And he was a whole new person in a lot of ways. He had gone through a serious salve et coagula. But he had the support of a community that understood what was going on, and the support of a teacher and the teacher's assistants who could create a safe space for him to go through that. And in Jacob's case, I would bet you that if he had had the same sort of thing, it would have been a different story. But when you don't, you have no idea what's going on.
And lots of people are eager to slap labels on that experience.
Yeah. And the guy later went on to become a very, very beloved Sufi teacher for many years. So, just saying. And no, it wasn't me. Might have been Noor, but that's different. I don't even think you were born then.
No,
It was in the 1970s. So,
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
not quite. Not quite.
Nope. You were still screaming towards planet Earth like a meteor.
All right. So there are reasons why this can be a risky endeavor. I think we
Yes.
made that pretty clear.
Okay, so the alchemical process itself. You start out looking at 4 steps, which are the negrito, which means the blackening. And this is symbolic of death of the old ways of being. Very poetic. Then you have the albedo, which is the whitening, which is the process of the rebirth and soul consciousness, soul construction. Most people will put a citrinatus, which is the yellowing, which is symbolic of the development of soul consciousness, of the 4th level of the human being. And then finally, rubido, the reddening, which is the attainment of spiritual liberation, which is to say you have moved from your fate to your destiny. Within this is an octave of processing. And it starts with that thing that I was talking about, calcination, which is you take your ego and you burn it to ash. And not just a little ash, not funky ash. You burn it until it's literally you burn, you grind, you burn, you grind, you burn, you grind, until you get this very soft, very white kind of powder. And that is the stage of breaking down your ego. And this is something that will take a couple of years in most people because you don't want to do it all at once. I can break down your ego for you really quick. It just requires a massive amount of dimethyltryptamine to be smoked over several hours. By the time you're done, you won't have any ego, but it also won't do you any good.
You'll be useless to yourself and
Everyone
you care
else.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, until you can pull yourself back together again. So calcining is the first state. It is the state of burning off the dross. So the next step is dissolution. And later on, I will have this all laid out on an Enneagram for you. Next week, probably. Dissolution is the dissolving of the calcined material into a solvent. And it can be anything from water to alcohol. I mean, you could do it with benzene probably, but God, who would want to? And in the case of this, the solvent that you use are a particular set of practices that revolve around what Sufis call zikr or dhikr, depending on your accent.
Which means remembrance.
Yes. What Gurdjieff called self-remembering. That is the solvent that begins to separate the crap from what you want. And that's the next stage, is separation. You separate and you filter, you purify over and over again. Then you get to the stage of conjunction, taking that which you have purified, the raw elements, the mercury, sulfur, and salt, and beginning to recombine them. And the recombining is Very, very important because it needs to be done correctly. This is the beginning of human number 4 here. The next step is fermentation. Fermentation requires something from the outside to be added. I mean, if you're fermenting beer, you have to add yeast. If you're fermenting sauerkraut, and I love sauerkraut, so I'm really familiar with this, you need certain bacteria to create the fermentation process. Same with kimchi. The fermentation further breaks down anything that's left over. And this ends up at like 0.5 on the Enneagram. The point of most work is at the fermentation process. The next step is distillation, where you've taken that fermented material and you distill off and purify that which is essential and leave behind any of the last impurities. And then you get to the last state, which is coagulation, where the substance is crystallized into a solid state, which is the stone that I was talking about. You have the stone of a plant, and ultimately what we're working on here is what's called the philosopher's stone, the medicine of metals, the elixir of life. And when you coagulate what's left and crystallize it into a state, you actually have a what Gurdjieff would say, a real soul, a real I, which is freed from the mechanical nature of the ego. So you are no longer trapped in this egoic programmed stimulus response life that you've been living, and you have an access to freedom. That's how you would read this. So any questions about this?
I don't think this is something anybody understands in one dive. This is something
No, or
that,
even 2 or 3 or 4
yeah,
dives.
reveals itself.
That's why we're taking a whole month
Yeah.
to delve into this.
So if you're feeling like, oh my God, what the fuck is this?
And you won't get the secret until the last part of the month. The secret part of this will be delivered at our other talk at the end of the month.
Ah, wow.
Yeah, I have been thinking
Third
about
Sunday.
this.
Yep.
Yes, the third Sunday of the month, we will reveal to you the ultimate secret of alchemy.
That is.
And it will be interesting.
That's actually next week, you know.
Is it?
Yeah.
How did we get here? How is it already next weekend? We'll work it out. Don't worry.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
We're just teasing you.
No, we're not. It's all real. So this is basically it for tonight.
Yeah.
Tune in to both of our talks next week. I guess that's our third weekend. You don't have to be here for both of them. They'll both end up on YouTube, so you can watch them at your leisure. But I would love to have you here, especially if you happen to speak Arabic.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint. Nudge, nudge.
So, Nancy, I saw you unmuted. Did you have like a thought or a question?
Yeah, just a joke, which is that the thing is that the first Sunday was on the 1st.
Yes.
Then the third could sneak up on you.
That's exactly what
Yeah.
I'm thinking. Yeah.
So does this mean
Story
we
of
get
our
the secret
lives.
next week or not?
Next week, you're going to get the secret. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we will talk about the secret at the other talk in the morning. And then we will look at more parts of it in the evening, and then we will finish it up on the last Sunday.
Well, we got 5
And maybe we'll do
Sundays this month.
Yeah. Do we have 5 Sundays this month?
We have 5 Sundays this month.
Oh, it works out perfectly then.
Yeah.
Yeah. We planned this, really. totally planned like this.
All right. Does anybody else have any last thoughts or questions?
Cherie, you must think something.
I'm confused as always. But
That's a good sign.
well, it makes me wonder. So you're going to point out to us in the next coming weeks what this is going to look like. How do we even become aware that how to start burning off our dross, how to actually start then putting it back together, and what that looks like, what that feels like, what are we looking for?
Yeah, we're going to be hitting on all of this. And these are important questions. And like I said, you know, in the New Age, there are tons of people who talk about them doing alchemy. Very few of them know what the hell they're talking about.
So in saying that, are you going to help us actually to recognize what's
Yes.
there and to, well, the thing that's been happening a lot is scamming and
Yeah.
conning people to thinking something's a truth and it's not a truth. I want to recognize how do we actually get to that.
Yeah, we're literally going to touch on that on the other talk.
This is a teaser.
Yes. Yes.
Guilty.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Chill out.
It's so hard to cover all this stuff in an hour or even an hour and a half. So.
Yeah. And we're getting to the point in the evolution of the nine-sided circle where we aren't going to be doing that anymore. I mean, we haven't been doing that since the beginning, but people don't notice. If you start at the beginning of our talks, they seem like we're just doing these random talks on subjects that we pull out of our ass. After about a year, you realize that there's a pattern to it. After you go through all of the talks, you go, oh, this is an entire curriculum that's been put forth while we weren't looking. Because that's what we've been doing.
So hang in there, Cherie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Levita, are you hanging in there? Yeah, good. Jacob, how about you? Are you hanging in there? Hopefully you're doing good. I know you're trying to do your job at the same time, so just checking in on you. Chris disappeared.
Chris, come back. There he is.
Any thoughts, Chris?
You're just along for the ride.
Along for the ride. I like that. Great. James, how about you?
It's very encouraging. But I particularly liked the very start, Fate and Destiny. I turned 55 a few months ago, and I know that on my current trajectory, it's just going to be fate, fate, fate. My past is going to become my future.
Let's
So,
avoid that.
yeah, I would like to avoid that. That's one of my motives for being here. So it's encouraging. I'd encountered these ideas a lot previously, just purely on an intellectual level, books and such. But no, I found it encouraging. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think we have done a talk specifically discussing
Fate versus
and destiny.
Destiny.
So
Yeah, we did quite a
should
while ago.
Link that, or put it in the end card so that people
Yeah.
can check
And
that out.
Chris, because I know that you know a lot about this subject, feel free to send questions that you would like covered, or questions that we can at least make up answers to if we don't actually know them. And also to chime in on any of these processes, because you've already studied this, you know about this. So yeah, don't think that you have to just sit there and be quiet. Be noisy. We like noise.
Deal. Yeah, thank
Good.
you.
All right.
Hind, how are you feeling?
I'm just excited for next week. Yeah, I think it's gonna be very very heavy.
It will be interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm excited if you're going to be there next week.
Yes, I will be there.
Good,
Yay.
because we miss you when you're not here.
Yeah, I miss you too. It was Christmas time, and I had lots of work, and
Yeah,
We understand. We get it.
yeah. We don't mind when you don't show up, but we do miss you.
oh,
Your absence is noticed.
I miss you too, and I was so happy when I found out that you didn't do the talk on Saturdays. So it was good. I didn't miss.
You didn't miss anything. You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Would you like to read Jacob's
Yeah.
comment?
I am happy to read Jacob's thoughts. Yes. All right. So yeah, he had some thoughts he wanted to share. Being at my job currently, I was sort of forced to mingle the talk with what I do here. I'm a cannabis extraction tech whose job focuses around the extraction, distillation, and crystallization of target compounds. This is less of a question and more of a practical inquiry, but I'm pondering the idea of a quote active mediation unquote of sorts that mingles the physical acts of alchemy with the spiritual, if that makes sense.
Absolutely does.
Okay, spiritual active meditation. Okay, that's what he was intending. That mingles the physical acts of alchemy with the spiritual. Yeah, that does make sense to both of us.
Yeah.
And he continues, my process is extremely similar to the one posted above, the one that Mushtaq was describing. So don't worry about the comments here. So there are many actionable parallels to the actual spiritual concepts outlined.
Yeah. Funny you should mention that, because I will tell you that I have made the alchemical stone of cannabis, and yeehaw, it makes shatter look like Kool-Aid.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah,
dangerous.
and one of my closest friends, may God keep his secret, was a cannabis grower and extractor, and he and I spent a lot of time together. This is all legal, of course, back in Michigan, where you had, legal medicinal marijuana, and creating extractions is a downright alchemical process if you know what the hell you're doing, and you run the risk of blowing yourself up. So it has all the fun of real alchemy.
Adventure. That is awesome, Jacob. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that sounds pretty synchronous. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, you're already doing alchemy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do we have anything left to add? I am good. What about you, Mushtaq?
Yeah, I am good.
All
So
right,
I'm
then.
ready to sign off until next week and cook us some dinner.
Yay. All right, then. So we can go on Brady Bunch mode. This is something
Okay,
we like
let me
to
get
do
us on Brady Bunch
for all of
mode.
us who are on
There we
video at
go.
least. And Jacob, I'm sure, is with us in spirit, even if he can't be on camera. And we like to wave to each other and wave to everyone watching on YouTube. Take good care, and we'll see you 2 times next Sunday.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.